Hello, my name's Tom, and what I want to do today is try and explain a few things, paradigms if you will, that have occurred to me. Let me just adjust this camera a little bit. I think it's just got to be, it's got to be up a little bit. Okay, I'm going to try and explain paradigms. Now, what I'm doing here, I'm not espousing any particular religion or political view or scientific view, except insofar as the paradigm that I develop. And I may draw from well-known political views or religious views or scientific views to demonstrate this. Now, also I'll have a preface to say that I'm coming from I'm going to use thermodynamics in this quite a bit, because that just means, well, I'm using it at a macro scale, so I'm ignoring, I suppose, quantum theory to some extent. But I'm saying that's okay because the paradigm I'm developing is to be used on the scale that we exist on, which is the macro scale. And I realise there's issues by doing that, but let's just, for now, put that to one side. So what am I trying to do here? Well, when I say paradigm, what I mean is, imagine, for example, you understand your tables, your 12 times tables. You don't actually understand the logic behind them or the rationale, so you understand them like a parrot would understand them. Yes, you could recite your 12 times tables, but you couldn't apply that knowledge to, say, an unknown. You couldn't apply that knowledge to, say, 54 times 22, because you've only learned the tables in parrot fashion. When you understand the paradigm between how to multiply numbers together, that you actually understand what the number 2 is and what the multiplication of another 2 means, once you get the idea behind it, you can then go on and apply it to numbers beyond your 12 times tables. It's just that there's sort of this nexus that allows you to apply the two together. So, paradigm means a system, as I'm going to use the word, a system that allows you to encompass other systems, so you get a deeper understanding. So when I develop a paradigm, the paradigm I'm looking for is the paradigm that will encompass all other paradigms. And as soon as the paradigm that I arrive at no longer encompasses all other paradigms, so I found another paradigm that encompasses the last paradigm I had, then I expand to that paradigm. So I'm trying to find, if you will, a general solution paradigm. And I have to say it's a general solution paradigm to human existence, or everything as we understand it, or even maybe we don't understand it. So I'll call this, I've actually got a name for it, it's called thermomimetica paradigm. That's thermomimetica paradigm. Now I may jump around here a bit, but I hope the viewer will fill in the parts that they may want to read up. You may want to look at memetics, thermodynamics, paradigms, and a few other branches of science or knowledge that we may touch on. Let me just check this is recording. Is it recording? Yes, I believe we are recording. So, I don't know how many of you had the opportunity to read about memetics, or possibly Richard Dawkins, and he wrote a book called The God Delusion. Now, interesting book. And the idea of there's another book called The Me Machine, another book called The Selfish Gene. The Selfish Gene was by Dawkins, I think. Anyway, it's not really the man who wrote it, it's the subject matter I'm interested in. Now, I have to say, let me just put the output. One of the things that disturbs me about Dawkins was, on one moment he decries religion, yet he approaches his science with a religious fever. And I'll tell you an example of what I mean. When you look at and I'm not going to tell you what I believe one way or the other, but I'm just going to say to you, or I think one way or the other, I'm just going to say to you, when you look at how Dawkins treats evolution, for example, or how the scientific community treats evolution, the problem is there's always going to be an element, well, there is an element of faith in the science they exercise. And it disturbs me when the scientific community doesn't see this. So, for example, we have faith that our senses work and that they represent reality. But I think everyone kind of accepts at a level that what they see, and maybe not what they see is what they believe, but they generally interact with reality with their senses. But let's go a bit beyond that. For example, if you look at something called Koch's postulates that demonstrate the existence of a disease, you've got to have repeatable, sort of a repeatable establishing of that disease causes that outcome. And it's a little bit more complex than that, but basically it's repeatability. And for me, I feel comfortable with science when I can tell you a repeatable experiment. And okay, that repeatability, I don't know what's going to happen next time, but the fact I've done it 10 times before, you know, the law of gravity works every time I try it, I'm prepared to believe it will work in the future. But one of the problems is, as a scientist, when a scientist travels back into, say, let's say some parts of evolutionary theory, is, okay, for example, I may be able to see a bacteria now inherits a characteristic from another bacteria and may become, as we define it, another species. But in my lifetime, I haven't seen, in nature or even in a laboratory, I haven't seen a dinosaur become a bird. I haven't seen that evolution. And of course that may take, according to evolution theory, millions and millions of years to observe. But that's my point. As soon as you start, for me, going something beyond repeatable experiment, the amount of faith involved, I think, for me, increases. Because, yes, I could look at, let's say, radioactive decay in thorium or some, I'm not quite sure, some very long-lasting elements, say, try and date this particular age. But there's assumptions in that. And the fact that I can't repeatably prove it, I can't run evolution of the species in a laboratory or in the world, because I would need millions and millions of years to do it, to test that theory. And then I'd like to repeat it a few times just to make sure I got it right. So, and I suppose that's why it's called a theory. So I find what I'm trying to get at is, you've got to be aware there's an element of faith that everyone imputes into their science. And it's where they feel comfortable, and that casts off of faith. And for me, faith, I find the leap of faith in, let's say, evolution as it's taught at the moment, evolution of the species, I think there's quite a lot of faith involved there. Because they're, more or less, I can't run a repeatable experiment. Yes, I can look at elements of it, I can kind of see circumstantial evidence, but I can't run the actual experiment. And I think there's a sort of elasticity, the amount of faith that we impute into many things. I mean, where do you feel comfortable with? And that's one of the things about Dawkins' book I would criticise, is that he becomes slightly fundamentalist in his approach. He becomes a fundamentalist scientist. So rather than looking at, let's say, what he would classify as a religion, say Christianity or whatever the religion may be, I think a more objective approach, and I think this is the way he would like to use the word scientist, someone who is objective or impartial or neutral approach, would be to think, well, why has religion, and I use religion in an encompassing term, why has it survived? Why does it continue? What's its hold? What advantage does it give? Is there a selective advantage? I know he does address this in some respects, but I feel he gets himself lost in his fervour for anti-religion, rather than saying, well, you know, if you, let's say as a Christian, you believed in doing good to others and trying to live morally upright life, whatever that means, or being honest, and I leave you to impute what honesty means. But you know, there's general things. Maybe that's not an entirely bad thing. So and then I suppose you go to the humanist approach, which deals with all that. But I think what Dawkins has to ask is, why does it thrive? And maybe he does do that, but I don't believe in the book, because it's a funny book. I didn't read it continuously. I read bits and pieces, but I understand, well, I hope I understand the general thing he's getting at. I'd like to see a more objective treatment of the subject matter, and that's where I think he missed out. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to try and offer a paradigm to the viewer, and it's for you to decide how this impacts you. All I'm going to give you is a toolkit. I mean, you do with this toolkit whatever you see fit. So let's take a beginning. It's all about, let me use the term idea. You can't read this, can you? My text is not big enough. Hang on a moment. Okay, so here's what I think, here's the paradigm thermomimetica that I would introduce. Idea. I'm still not sure if you can read that. I apologise if you can't. I'll just check here. I think you can. Okay. What it's about, the paradigm I've developed says this: everything we do, or what we are, is a compilation of ideas. And when I say idea, just bear with me for the moment, I don't mean a spiritual, non-physical thing. I will adopt the word physical for the sake of the argument up to a point, and you'll see where I go with that. So, I think the best way to demonstrate this is, let's take your name. Everyone's familiar with their name, or most people are. I hope you would be. But what's to stop me calling myself John on Tuesdays, Fred on Thursdays, Harry on Fridays, and who knows, maybe Elizabeth on Wednesdays. Oh, sorry, Saturdays. I could call myself, go around and call myself whatever name I wish to call myself. But I don't. Why don't I? Well, because it'd be really convenient for me to call myself a different name every day. Not just for my own memory's sake, but to interact with other people. So the idea that I have a constant name is the idea that competes the alternative, an alternative, which could be to call myself something different every day. I mean, I could go and do that, even if it wasn't legally recognised. I could do it. I can insist that people call me Harry on Thursdays. And the people at work, or your high school, or your university, or whatever, you'd soon drive away a lot of friends who just think, oh, this is ridiculous. You know, they might find it quirky, but it'd be problematic. So that idea, while I could do it, doesn't uptake on our minds. Now, when I say idea, I would put it to you that every thought we have, the fact that my name is Fred, say, it's a bunch of arrangements of particles, of neurological particles, neurons in my head, and electrical configurations. And you could probably excise, if you did neurosurgery, with a fine enough, a nano scalpel or something, the neurons that I'm called Tom, if you knew where they were. So I would say from no brain to a complete brain, there's a bundle of ideas that are physically manifested. And again, I use the word physical at the moment just for the sake of it. So the idea that I'm called Tom, say, and I use that as a constant from day to day, month to month, year to year, that outcompetes for time and space the idea that I'm called Fred and Harry and a different name every day. Now there may be occasionally you go to a fancy dress or to a party and you adopt a second name, or a writer may adopt a pseudonym, or people have aliases. So it's not quite as silly as it sounds to adopt different names. So maybe that idea to adopt a different name does have some resonance in our thoughts, in our minds. Now let's take another example. If you think about Oh, I've gone blank for a minute. Ideas compete. What else competes? Okay, here's another example. If you've got a computer, right, and you've got some large graphics files on there, but over time you need the room back on your drive, your hard drive, or wherever you store your data. You delete those files and you put on some new files. Let's say some new drawings files that are more important to you, or new graphics files. Maybe you had some pictures of you know, a house, but then you've got some family pictures, and you need to delete those and put this new information on. What's happening there is you're actually, again, on the medium of the hard drive, you're competing. You're saying this data is more important than this data, and I've only got enough time and space for one, so I'm sorry, that's got to go. So this set of data has outcompeted that data. Now, maybe a more accurate example is when you look at your processor. So you're using a computer and then it goes very slow. That's because there's something's often using up the processing speed. So you might go in there and try and shut down some of the other programs. And you're saying, well, this program's not as important, that program's not as important, I want this program to run. So on the processor, you're giving this idea, this energetic execution of a program, more precedence over that one. So there's a kind of, and I use the word war or competition going on that processor for time, energy, and space on that processor. In our minds, it's a similar sort of thing. Different ideas are trying to uptake on our mind. So, as I said, the basically trivial but I think important example that we adopt a singular name. Now, other ideas we adopt everyone, almost universally, almost universally, adopts the importance of friends and family, and the meaning of learning to communicate with people, at least some stage in your life, the importance of eating and how to do it. And these ideas uptake in our mind, and indeed just walking and moving and breathing. Like some of them are hardwired, like to breathe, non-conscious breathing is hardwired into the structure of our nervous system. So what I'm getting at is essentially a way we can describe the paradigm of our existence is we are a combination of ideas, and these ideas are competing with each other for time and space on in our physical mind, in our mind. So when we look at the root of it, it's like having a tabletop and watching all these ideas coming on and trying to outcompete each other. First of all, they've got to be able to be perceived and get onto the system, but then they've got to compete for the time and space to manifest themselves. And the ideas that tend to stick over time, they're what become, in shorthand, we could call our character or our personality. So, for example, some ideas in certain, let's say, areas of mathematics, they simply can't be perceived because maybe your understanding, or you don't have the time or the interest, and I'll come back to interest as a sort of perception thing, or the opportunity of that idea uptake into your system. So what I'm proposing is that one way to look at the human being is a coalescing and competition of ideas on our minds, but also our nervous systems. In fact, any part of our body that can record any information. Our immune system works in a similar way. It meets an infection. When it defeats it, it records, it remembers what happened there. So next time, the fact that it's got that information, it can do something more quickly about it. Now, you probably all know this kind of general thing before I said it here, of course, but I'm trying to wrap it together and maybe bring it all together and produce something usable and knitting together a paradigm out of it all. Now, let's look at some ideas. I think let's take a look at a religion. Let's say Christianity, and a lot of people impute what Christianity means, but let's look at Christianity. Now, here's an idea that's developed in various forms over the last 2,000 years. And the fact that it survived until the present day means that over time, lots and lots of questions are going to be posed to Christianity. But people have come up with answers, one way or another, that have addressed those questions. So over 2,000 years, you've had this very fine and textured idea be developed that is probably very, very, very hard to resist. You think about it, this idea and all the workings into it have had this length of time to adapt to the human vessel. So when you're born, you've only got an 80-year lot on the planet. Of that, as a child, you probably don't, until you get to a certain age, you can't understand something. You can't perceive what the ideas mean. But once you can, you're standing in front, your mind is standing in front of a tidal wave, is the way to put it, of this other idea. And you don't really stand a chance. You don't really stand a chance to be able to argue against it. Because, not directly anyway, because all the arguments you could put have probably already been put, or 99.99% of them have been put. And it has successfully uptaken on many, many millions of people's minds and outcompeted other ideas, or stopped other ideas coming in, or being it actually outcompetes other ideas. Even if they've come in, it's managed to say, well, no, look, when I compare the two, I would reject that and accept this. But the problem is, I think it was a tidal wave. It's had 2,000 years to develop. Like a huge wave, it's like an ocean. And it's massive. And then you're born, and you've got a paltry lifetime to come up and try and resist and understand what this is all about and then reject it. But this has been successful with millions and millions of people. And we can look at other religions. They've done the same thing. Because these religions are developed and sophisticated ideas. Perhaps the only way to, and this is why I think this paradigm I'm saying is quite useful, the only way to cope with this tidal wave is realise what's happening. So instead of standing in front of it and developing your own ideas against it, or maybe not against, but to reason about it, you've probably spent a lifetime trying to reason and philosophise, and people have. Religious scholars, non-religious scholars, historians, all sorts of people spend lifetimes. But they're sort of trying to build their own little wave in their own lifetime. They simply can't do it. At least most people can't. But if you look at this, this is a two-dimensional picture. If we step beside it and then see what's going on, then I think you can actually start saying, well, no, this is an idea that has been developed in such a way, and all I need to recognise is that it's also trying to fight for time and space in my mind and in my actions. Now, this doesn't just relate to Christianity, you can use for any religion. It also comes down to political theories. You look at democracy, or a communist theory, or anarchy, or any theory or view or philosophy you care to have. Democracy itself is, again, it's an idea that is, I suppose, back with the Greeks to some limited extent, started off and then it's gone through different times and it's come very large, whether we accept it works or not, or whether what we have now is democracy or not. That idea is what is given to us. And it's very hard to develop by yourself, to develop something to inoculate yourself or to be able to argue against it, because it had so many people and learned people develop it. It's uptaken on them, it's built upon itself. So I think it's like the pyramids. The pyramids are quite easy to see, and you recognise how hard it would be to go and build yourself your own pyramid. You need lots of people, lots of time. You simply couldn't do it. But there's these pyramids and edifices of ideas out there that are vying for our attention and have been very successful in inhabiting us before. So what I'm saying with this paradigm thermodynamic method is once you realise what's going on and you take a step back, you can sidestep it. And that's what this toolbox is here to do. So another idea, an example of how this would happen, is for a period of time, a lot of people, believe the Earth was a disc and was flat. And maybe when you sail a ship, you've been in the ocean, you can understand why they would believe that. But then, and it would have been quite a job to explain to someone that the Earth is spherical. You think about it, well, if I'm walking on this side, why don't I fall off that side? It goes against your everyday experience. And it would be hard to explain to someone. But once people have at least an inkling what gravity is, they've seen the picture of the world, they've got a globe on their desk, this idea that the world being a disc, say it was accepted over thousands of years, is quite quickly, in a generation or two, it dissolves. And so the Flat Earth Society, because there's still people that believe the Earth is flat, is quite a small remnant. So it's gone from this tidal wave to a drop of water. And it's quickly evaporating. And that's what's happened there. So it is possible, because this new bit of information's come along. With religion, it's often hard to get that new bit of information, but then I think standing beside it and realise what's going on, you get those tools. So the same with scientific method. There's another idea that repeatability is also vying to uptake on your mind, and people that exercise and believe in science. And people will say, well, I'm a scientist, or someone else is a scientist, and so it must be I'm objective. No, I don't think scientists are objective. They're practitioners of a particular method. And that method is the one that they feel comfortable with. And that method has also been given to them by their own readings, and that's an idea that's uptaken on them. So it's irrelevant what words, and I use the word semiotics, you apply to whatever the idea is. You could call it science, you could call it religion, but even the word science itself is an idea. And this is where you get the recursive nature of the paradigm comes in. Even the words themselves are ideas. But here's the neat thing about this paradigm. What it lets me do is this. It lets me say, okay, let's suppose for a moment, it gets around the whole spirit-body divide. It doesn't really matter anymore whether I have a spirit or I don't have a spirit, or I have a soul or I don't have a soul, and I don't start making these divisions. This paradigm tells me to stop making these divisions into spirit and soul and body. I don't, or material and non-physical, physical and metaphysical. I don't make these divisions anymore. What I say is, what the paradigm allows me to do is say, well, at the end of the day, even if I did have a spirit, or there was a spirit, again, that's simply a compilation of ideas that are wanting this to happen and that to happen. So I can flatten out all those kind of arbitrary divides, or even maybe not arbitrary, but I can flatten them out. I can stand beside them and say, well, it's not really a big question. My physical, my spiritual, my tangible, my unseeable, the seen world, the non-seen world, is not really an issue anymore. All I say is that all these different words that we give these things, I can reduce them to a set of this idea competing with that idea. So you can say, for example, if you believe in God, God is trying to project a certain amount of ideas onto you to behave in a particular way, in a particular manner, have a particular belief system. So you can kind of flatten out all of these trichotomies or dichotomies or divisions and actually start becoming an archaeologist of words and getting, I think the word is subterranean, getting to the basal roots of the competition and a way of describing what's happening. So then it becomes to you can say, well, okay, I find myself in this situation. I accept, or I've been told to accept, or I've uptaken that I live in a let's say, a democratic state. What does that mean? Well, it's supposed to mean this, but it doesn't mean that. But then I can say, but this is just this for lack of a better word, propaganda or other ideas that have uptaken on my mind. And successfully so to this extent, or maybe I don't believe it, or maybe some people believe in communism, and that's had a successful uptake. But then I think the powerful, interesting questions become, how do we make choices? And I think a way to make a choice, because I believe, well, the way to make a choice is to actually understand what's going on. Like the earlier example of the maths table, when you get 2 times 2, rather than parrot fashion, you actually understand the deeper multiplication of what's going on. When you understand that these ideas, whoever it is that's telling you, it could be from the TV, the computer, it could be from your own ponderings. It could be from, as you may say, God. Some people believe in God, we can't deny that. It could be from a vision, it could be from anyone. If you're a Mormon, it could be from Joseph Smith's writings, who knows. Wherever these come from, adopting this paradigmatic approach allows you to flatten them, sidestep them, and see them for what they are. Or at least describe them in a way that can be measurable against other things. And you say, well, why would this idea be successful? Why is it being successful? Why is the human mind particularly susceptible to this particular idea? Because things don't usually occur unless they confer some type of advantage. So almost an evolution of thoughts. And that's why it becomes irrelevant to some extent whether I say that idea uptakes on the physical matter of the brain or spiritually or whatever. That's why I was careful about those terms in the beginning. I mean, it doesn't matter about the medium. The fact that ideas are uptaking on a hard drive and you select, or maybe even the program selects, what idea should be there or shouldn't be there, what data set should be there or shouldn't be there. There's a competition going on there. So the medium of the human body is just another medium for these ideas to uptake. And what we call our character and our personality and our activities, they're the longer reaching and the longer established and establishing ideas that have managed to remain in our minds. And I think what this would tell us is that what makes us what we call human is our ability to uptake more complex ideas and nuances, what we would call feelings, than, let's say, a computer could. Computers can't do it at the moment. Well, arguably it can't. We'll go to a Turing test. In fact, I think the Turing test is quite a good way to test sentience, and I think the Turing machine is, again, it's kind of hitting on that. It's kind of like hitting on what's happening. It's a endless tape where you can compare and move bits of information along that endless tape. And that's what we're doing. We're sort of comparing and being able to compare complex ideas all the time. So this paradigm more or less says, whatever it is someone's trying to tell you, whether it be your teacher, a book, from your own ponderings, if you have the time or you wish to question that belief, you can do it. And you just have to realize this is another idea that's trying to, or may have an influence on the way you act. There's nothing wrong with rejecting a particular idea, but you should realize the consequences of it. So, for example, as I alluded to before, it doesn't decry, it doesn't say that Christianity is wrong or Muslims are right or anything like that. It's not about that. Or Muslims are wrong, Christians are right. It's just a way of approaching a way of describing what's happening. And I believe it allows you to circumvent a lot of the head-on tidal wave issues. It allows you to circumvent, I think, the furphies, these sort of red herrings, if you will, the diversions of spirit and body. I think that dichotomy is very particularly misleading. I think we're a far more unified than that sort of split. And even the fact that we have a physical appearance, what we call physical, the word physical is loaded with meaning that you've got to get under. So what I'm saying is, you have the ability to now take, if you wish, take a step back and then think, why do I believe this particular system? Is it because it's had this long to develop and I never really stood a chance? Is that why it's been successful? But then noting that if it has developed for that long, maybe there's some positives in letting it be accepted. So I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater here, but I am giving you a system that describes the paradigm involved. So I hope you can apply this. I hope it gives a more, well, who knows, it might give Richard a few things to think about. And I think this is what he's sort of grasping at to some extent, but he's got sidetracked into being a, what I would call, maybe very slightly, but a fundamentalist scientist, which is, who knows, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, but I don't think it's what he really will aspire to be. Okay, so that'll do for that one for now. The next one I'm going to do is on how would you write a computer program to exhibit sentience, that means sort of, I suppose, human-like behaviour. Okay, so my second lecture is going to be on how would you approach writing a program that would exhibit human behaviour. Now there's been endless writing on this, I suppose, in the AI field and neural network field, etc., and many much science fiction. And rather than actually, going step by step writing the program, I think you've got to approach this task from a very high level. When I say high level, very conceptual level about what's going on. When you've got a conceptual level about what's going on in what we call sentience, and I ascribe to the Turing test as a possible test for sentience. I think we impute sentience to someone. Then I think you can start seeing, well, what would a program look like? How would it function to replicate sentience? And here's how I think it would do it. Let's say I draw a circle with a compass and a pencil. It would look a bit better than that. Let's say I draw a circle. How can I make a vision program, this is something that's done quite a lot, understand that that's a circle? It's got a meaning, that it's got a shape. How would I do it? Well, let's say my computer doesn't have a compass and it doesn't really understand what a compass is. What it may be able to do is, it may be able to make lots of tangents. It may be able to say, well, my camera shows me a little black dot there. I can throw a tangent there. I don't see one there, I don't see one there. So I can throw tangents kind of near where I see the highest density of dots. So by throwing lots of these tangents, it may map out what a circle is. So with only the use of straight line tangents, it could report to me, or actually draw for me, or pick out the circle that's been drawn. So it's kind of found or mapped out the shape in issue. I use the example because I'll move on to how I'm going to put forward an artificial intelligence would work. And maybe when I say artificial, I step back from it. Maybe this is how our minds, in some respects, work, at least one level. Well, I use the example. Say I say to someone in my house, I say, Johnny, can you change the light bulb? Now, imagine I had a Johnny, let's say he's a 12-year-old kid, he's probably, well, let's say he's 18, so he's old enough. Johnny would understand what I mean. Even though I said, Johnny, can you change the bulb? Generally, Johnny would be able to simply go and find a light bulb, plug it in, and put it into the light, actually test it afterwards, and make sure that it's all right. Now, I believe most AI specialists in the field would tell you this is an extremely complex task for a computer to do. Extremely complex. Even if you gave a computer a robotic body that could manipulate everything, just the coordination of putting it in and understanding, it's a very, very complex task. There's a lot of things involved. So how would we do it? Well, I'm going to get it. So I've asked Johnny to put a bulb in. Let's say just say a bulb. Now, let's say Johnny was a 5-year-old kid. Of course, I'm not going to put an electrical thing in. But let's say, just for the sake of argument, say put the bulb in. He wouldn't necessarily know what a bulb is or a light bulb is. And he may not have the presence of awareness to understand his surroundings, but 5-year-old kids probably would. But there comes a point where, let's another one. Let's say, can you fix the tyre? You would have to know exactly what I'm looking for. I'm talking about a puncture, so you can actually go and examine it and think about it. Do I mean on the car or on the bicycle? There's a lot of presupposition and knowledge that goes into that. So what I'm saying is, as we age, as we grow up from a child to our younger years and through to adult years, we collect a lot of information, an enormous amount of information, and we contextualize. So we build these data sets. We've got a data set, and the boundaries of these data sets are not rigid. So in this data set we'll have things about houses, and all things sort of surrounding houses. Like, for example, Johnny lives in a house. I understand that I live in this house. Houses have electrical wiring. Houses have light bulbs. So this data set, houses have kitchen sinks, houses have plumbing. By the time you're 18, you've got this quite complex data set, and what I'd say encompassing data set of all the information surrounding a house. So being able to contextualize the question, so having the sufficient input to contextualize. So when I say, can you change the bulb? If I was in the middle of the field, Johnny might look at me a bit strange, but hang on, I'm in the field. How can I change a bulb out here? Do you mean plant a tulip bulb? So the first thing is developing data sets of meaning. So you might, for example, in a program, have a data set about animals. A lot of information about animals. So in fact, they would say you'd have all the types of animals, and you'd have that some animals live in the zoo. You have some animals are mammals, some animals are more like us, some animals maybe less like us. You have something about bacteria, the kingdom of fungi, basically what we learn at school. You have another data set about family, who's in my family, what family relationships mean. Now there's a question what they mean. You might have just words associated with love, etc., or pain or dissatisfaction. Then how do you give meaning to those words? Well, my answer is, or an answer is, it makes me feel bad or feel good. So you have to have some sort of rating system in there, or way to make the computer feel, or the program understand that this is a good or bad thing. So you could say -1, -2, -3, or something like that, and have a kind of rating system. But beyond that, I'm not very interested in the rating. I'm interested in comprehension. So changing the bulb is my comprehension issue. So you'd have another data set. So you've got all these data sets about electricity. You have one about, there might be one about Thomas Edison, inventors. And what I believe is happening is this: when I say to someone, change the bulb, I'm actually projecting an idea, and the idea has a shape. In, let's call it idea space, for sake of a better word, just for convenience. Let's call it idea space. And this shape has to be perceived by a listener. And they perceive this shape by throwing parts of these data sets that have meaning, and maybe they combine data sets as well, at the shape of the idea that I put forward. So they can then map out, so even though they can't read my mind, they can map out the edge of the idea. And as they map out the edge of the idea, they can go ahead and do it or relate to it. They say, I don't know where the light bulbs are. Or they'll just do it and say, there it is. Or they may think, no, I don't like to do that. But the interesting part for me is being able to map out that idea. And you map out that idea by having these large amounts of data sets that increasingly improve and coming together. So the first time you learn about something, let's say in chemistry, it's quite hard. Maybe the very first time for the average person, it takes a lot of effort. But you learn how to make this curved data set to fit the ideas of chemistry, or for physics, you make this curved data set to fit the physics that you're presented with, or mathematics. So you've got to acquire the data set, then you've got to know the linkages to apply it. What I think our brain does, it becomes very efficient after you give it the data set and show it a few times how you would learn to put it onto that type of issue put towards you. You know how to bootstrap it onto something later. So you learn this data set, can you, and then that data set is an instructional one. So you have this whole data set of instructional that you will tape together, or you'll connect with an object. So we get into the vocabulary arrangement. Can you do this and that with the tire or the light bulb? And it's the perception of the idea that you're putting forward. It's done by creation of data sets. So I believe a way of constructing the intelligence is feeding the raw information in, putting it into the data sets, and then the linkage of the data sets. And the edges of the data sets have to come together. You have to come together sufficiently fast to map the idea that you're putting forward.